All right, welcome everyone to Configuration Management in Drupal for Beginners. I'm very excited to be here again at DrupalCon, this time DrupalCon Global 2020, to help get myself kind of in the mood and to get those good DrupalCon vibes going. I've got my badge from last year. I'm going to wear that throughout the conference and help make me feel a little bit more familiar. It's been really great and exciting to see familiar faces and names in the chat as well. So feel free to say hello and throw stuff in there if you would like to. Also, something that Kelly shared earlier that I just want to reemphasize, I'm going to be using slides today. So if you double click on the little slide portion of the window, it will make that bigger, which you might need in order to see those things a little bit easier on the screen. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. This is a sponsored session brought to you by Pantheon, my employer. However, if you don't say anything, I'll let you in on a little secret, and that's that configuration management is not a Pantheon invention. It's not something that we are trying to sell you. In fact, I'm not here to sell you anything at all, except maybe that configuration management is a really good idea, and it's really easy to get started with. So we will be using the Pantheon platform to go through the live demo later so I can demonstrate, like how you move stuff around. But besides that, there's nothing really Drupal or Pantheon specific about this session. So as I said, I do work for Pantheon. I am a developer advocate there. When we went to conferences in person, I would spend about a week out of a month or so at a conference, going around, attending, kind of being out in the community, contributing back to the community, leading training workshops, or being a mentor, or other things that I could do there in person, kind of sharing all of my Pantheon experience and all the things that come with working here with the community and giving back whenever I can. And then I took everything out in the community that I learned, the relationships I built, the things that I heard people say, back to Pantheon so that our developers are actively improving the product and creating things that are genuinely interesting and useful for folks. So that's really what my role as a developer advocate means to me. But yeah, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. I'm at David Needham, and the text should be on the slides as we go through it. But so jumping into configuration management, I think it's important to begin first with the anatomy of a CMS. And I'm saying CMS, a content management system, specifically because we're talking about Drupal here today, but this anatomy is true for any sort of web application. It's true for any Drupal, WordPress, Joomla, sort of any of those sorts of non-SaaS CMSs. This is what you're going to get. You have code, which in Drupal is the modules, the themes, the Drupal core itself. But then we also have configuration. And this configuration is your content types, your fields, your views, all the things that go into making your website look yours, look personalized, look like something that you've created. And then we also have content. Content is maybe self-explanatory, but that's your blog posts, your products, all of the customer information that you might be having, donations, on and on. It could be anything. It could be lots of stuff. But when you think about your content management system and you start thinking about, well, how do I take this and export it somewhere else? How do I, take it into my hosting platform? How do I move it locally? How do I move this site around? Well, it ends up getting broken up into three different parts. Again, we have the code, which if you're using version control, hopefully you have it in Git and all of that fun stuff. But then we also have the database. And then we also have the files. And so if we were to draw lines between these different pieces of the CMS and what gets exported when you are preparing to take it somewhere else, moving it from local to a live environment or from a development environment to live or something like that, well, the code is code. That's easy. But configuration gets saved in the database. When you edit your site, you add a content type, you add a field, and you do all those different things, Drupal is reading that change and saving it directly into the database. That is where Drupal is actively reading your configuration, making changes, updating, recalling whenever something needs to be displayed on the screen. All of that information is there. Now, content also gets saved there in addition to files. And this is everything that you'd have in the files directory on your Drupal site. So these are content files. These are images and PDFs and things that get uploaded whenever you create content on your site. And the database will have references to those image files and things like that. So once you have this sort of in your mind and you're kind of prepared and ready and thinking about how this works, now let's shift gears a little bit and thinking about a sort of modern development workflow. So a long time ago, when I first got started, not first got started with Drupal, but I would say about 9 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, I was talking to my friend and colleague at the time, Jen Lampton, and she was telling me, and we were actually in a classroom, about this best practice workflow. And as she said at the time, it's true for any web application. You really need at least 3 distinct environments that are isolated from each other to make sure that you have a safe, dedicated place to get your work done that doesn't put you in a situation where you're tempted to do cowboy coding or making changes to directly on your live environment. So she said, we have dev, test, and live. And not coincidentally, these are the same environments that we have on Pantheon. When you go to create an account, you set up a site, you'll have a dev, test, and live environment. Now, again, Pantheon didn't invent this. We just kind of adopted the best practices, rolled it out, and gave you a workflow to make it a little bit easier. So the way this works is the live environment is your live site. That's where you actually connect your domain name. It's where you interact with your customers. It's where people are buying or interacting, buying things from your store, making donations. People are adding content there. Editors are going in and moderating things or changing things. All of that stuff is happening in live. And so since those are being saved to the database and the files, you want to make sure that everything that we do, nothing will overwrite the database and files on live, because we don't want to lose any of that active content that's being created, and for some sites, changing every second. Well, we also have the dev environment. And the dev environment is where you are actively doing security updates for your site. You might be adding new modules or libraries to extend the functionality of your site. Also, you might have bug fixes. Somebody might be reporting issues on the live site, and so you go up to dev, you work with it there. And then the test environment sits between the two. It sits between the dev and the live, and it's the place where you can test. I mean, it's kind of in the name, right? But the thinking is, and the way it works on Pantheon is, when you are preparing to deploy your changes, you've completed some piece of functionality on dev, you're about to deploy it up, you start by syncing your files and your database down from live. So you're effectively making a copy of the live environment and putting it into the test environment. Then you can safely deploy your code from dev to test, and test now is a copy of live. You can run automated tests. You can just do manual QA. It's your chance to catch anything that might be broken before actually and eventually deploying it up to live. So once you're confident it's going to work, you get it up to live and you're good to go. And then you can sync your database and files back down to dev so that you're actively developing against all of the new content and things that have changed in live. You might notice here the files in the database go down. They go one direction from live down to other places, because you don't want to move it up, because then you risk overwriting the live environment. And code doesn't happen in live because you don't want to cowboy code. It's very dangerous or risky for your site. So you don't want to do that. So that happens in dev and kind of moves upstream. But the problem is, what about configuration, right? Where does configuration fit into this? Well, you typically do configuration in your development environment. You wouldn't do that on live. That's also a little bit like cowboy coding. You would do your configuration where you add your code, where you're adding your content types and views. And I mean, if we're adding content types and views, those are part of configuration. But the problem is that configuration is part of the database. All of your configuration on your site gets saved there. And since we don't want to move the database up, we'd be overwriting the test environment and then overwriting the live environment. That is not very safe for your customer data or content that's being created in live. And so we use configuration management to move configuration out of the database and into code. And there are lots of reasons why we would try to do this, but let's look at this from a slightly different angle to see exactly how this works in practice. So let's say we have our 3 environments. We're working in our dev environment. We've added some modules or some different things. We start actually making changes. We are modifying our configuration in some way. We're doing stuff, and that information gets saved in the database. That's just the way it works. Anytime you do something in the Drupal UI, that information gets saved there automatically. Well, in order to make this accessible, to make it possible to move through our workflow, you have to export that configuration. So it goes from the database, it gets exported into YAML files that get saved in your code, so that you can actually move your code through version control, and you can move it from one environment to the other. So we do that. We deploy our code then from our dev environment up to test, and then we import config. And now this is saying, hey, Drupal, overwrite the configuration that you already have in the database with what I have in my code. So it's going the opposite direction as the previous example. So it will overwrite anything that's already been saved in the database with what you have in your code as an exported configuration. And that works pretty well. So if we take a look at our development workflow again, but this time with configuration management, we still have dev test live, right? That's still a given. But as you are developing your site, you are routinely exporting your configuration from the database into code. You're creating commits. You're managing it as if it was just another piece of code on your website. So as we are preparing to deploy up to live, we're getting ready to go. We go through the typical process. We create a clone of live. We then deploy our code. But now we have a copy of live. We have all of our configuration that's there, but it's still reading the database that came from the live environment. So we just do a import. We import our configuration. That gives us all of the new content, all of the things that we have been looking at and interacting with on live, but now with all of the configuration that we've made in dev. And then once we've tested it and make sure that it's all working okay, we can actually go over to the live environment and do the same thing again. And I didn't emphasize this very much earlier, but before this process, before we had configuration management, what was your option for interacting with configuration? Because we can't move the database from dev up to test or dev up to live because we don't want to lose anything. When I built a lot of sites, I routinely had to do it again. I would have to go through, I would have to do my work in the dev environment and then do my work again, the same configuration in the test environment, hoping that I did it the same way and hoping that I didn't make any mistakes along the way. And then if it all worked, then I had to cross my fingers and do it a third time in the live environment. And this is a terrible developer experience. I mean, nobody likes to do their work more than once, right? If you could do it once and be done, if you've ever had to do work and then you lose it and you have to do it again, like that's just, it's sort of demoralizing. Like nobody likes that. Nobody wants to have to do that. And yes, you could, create a script. You could write some custom code that would, sort of manually work with the configuration. And we had some developers on our team that would do that for these really complex builds that was impractical to, manually redo the work again. But that's not something I could do. I do a little bit of development, but I've never written that sort of code myself. But configuration takes all of that burden and kind of throws it out the window. We don't have to worry about any of that because all that we have to do is click a button in the interface or run a little Drush command. And we have now exported configuration. We've imported it into a new environment, and it just works. So let's start talking a little bit more about this. So some of the benefits to using configuration management. Well, you get to move your configuration with your modules. And this is maybe understated, but I think this is a huge benefit because it can be a little bit confusing to not have it all packaged together neatly in one or two little commits. If you have configuration and some database query that you have to run that's separate from your modules that are interacting with that, there's just all sorts of complications that can come up with that. So being able to move it with with your modules is huge. Also, you get version control. Have you ever wondered, hey, who changed this part of our website? Who modified that view that did this thing on our front page? Well, if you're using configuration management, it's all in version control. You can actually go back see who changed that, exactly when it happened. And then if you want to, you can actually undo things. So if you don't want that change that someone made, it's all in Git. It's just YAML files. You could just undo that commit or change it back, and it's easy to go back to where you were. And also, as someone who goes through development cycles that can sometimes be a rather long time, using configuration management allows you to rebuild your development environment at any point. Typically you would, like I showed on the graph earlier, you might rebuild your development environment sort of at the end of the cycle once you've deployed up to live. But if you're using configuration management, as long as you've exported your configuration, you can create a new dump, a new copy of the database and files from live, overwrite your dev environment, and then just re-import your configuration. So if you're not sure if the changes you're making are going to conflict or work well with those changes that happened on live with content or other things, you don't have to guess. It just works. It's wonderful. And then you can also automate imports. You can run these things from Drush on your command line. You can plug in CI or some other sort of like cron-based process to automate it as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. I do see some questions real quick or discussion around like different Drupal versions. So this configuration management system was rolled out in Drupal 8. So ever since Drupal 8 came out, we've had this wonderful system for managing content. So it does currently also work in Drupal 9 and onto the future as well. However, in Drupal 7, we have basically the features module. Features was not created to do this. Features was created to sort of create preset functionality that you could package and kind of take and share from one site to the other. So if you build, a calendar, you could package that up and drop it into another site. Now it has a calendar, and then drop it in another site, and that has a calendar. And we sort of stole it or repurposed it to use it for configuration management, because it sort of solved the problem of moving our configuration from dev to test to live, sort of, but it was unreliable. It was buggy. There were a lot of false positives and false negatives about things that could or couldn't be working at the time. So when Drupal 8 came out with configuration management, it was built with that in mind, to be the solution to this. And so, yes, features is still around, but use it for the purpose it's intended for. If you want to package up functionality and move it around, you can absolutely do that. But speaking of that, there are some gotchas. There's some things you should think about before you actually start using configuration management right away. The first one is actually something I was just talking about. Your configuration is only intended to work on one website. This was intentional. It's discussed at length in a session I've linked to at DrupalCon Austin, I think. And if you didn't get a link to the slides, actually, I'm going to throw that in the chat window right now. You can go grab my slides and click that link if you want to learn more about that session, or click anything else that I'm going to be going through. But anyway, it's tied to one particular site. Once you've exported configuration, it is tied to a specific site UUID, so it's a specific site only, and it cannot be used on other sites. Now, there are modules that can kind of get around this, but that's why you use the features module instead of config management. Now, another thing, and this is kind of a big deal, is you probably actually need to talk to your team. Maybe your colleagues, that you're building the site with. If you have a customer, you're building the site for a customer and they're interacting with the site too, you might need to bring them in as well if they have rights to actually change configuration, because a big downside to using configuration management is that it removes, it can put you in a risky situation to lose some of your configuration on the live environment. If if we're using configuration management and the customer, who's also privileged to do stuff, starts making some changes to our block layout, our views, or things like that in live, and then we import configuration, they just lost all of their work. And again, there are modules that can help mitigate this to lock it down and make sure that we can't do configuration in live. But you need to talk to your team about that. You need to make sure that they are all on the same page and understand how the workflow is going to work. Otherwise, there might be some frustration around lost work, which, as we've already said, is never a good situation. I see a question here. How do we easily remember or find out what is config and what is content? Hey, it's almost like we planned it. I promise we didn't. But there's another gotcha is that Drupal is a little bit ambiguous with what is content and what is configuration. What about a Drupal block? Well, depending on the context, is a Drupal block part of configuration? Is it pretty much static and is like your navigation menu, for example, or is it something like your little welcome message, or is it something that changes regularly? Is it supplemental to the primary content you're looking at? It could be both. It could be neither. I mean, it's really tough to say for sure. And then also taxonomy. The taxonomy system in Drupal is your system of categorization and categorizing your content. Something that's static, like your categories for is this article a blog post or a press release or something else? That is probably static. That's probably not changing. So that's probably configuration. But what about your free tagging system that your content creators can just enter in tags into? Well, that's content, clearly, right? And this has always been a bit of frustration with any sort of exporting content or exporting configuration, because it's not always easy to tell which is which. Well, there are also some ways to kind of get around this too. And the next thing we're going to talk about is extra modules, things that can make it a little bit easier. There are some modules that will let you kind of dig in deeper and define certain things in different ways. So let's jump in. So my favorite module that I like to include with configuration management is a module called Config Direct Save. So by default, when you export configuration on any Drupal site, you go in, you go to export, you click the button to export your configuration. It downloads to your computer a compressed file that has all of your configuration in it. And maybe that makes sense if I'm working locally, if I want to export my configuration and put it in my computer. But I don't want that. I want it to be saved into code. I want to export my configuration and have it just write to my code base so that it's all there and I can do a commit and it's done. I don't want to have to, what I would typically have to do is actually export my configuration and then immediately go to the import tab and re-import it to overwrite the changes in my code. And that's really frustrating, right? Well, the config direct save will give you a sync option or an update option that actually lets you just click a button, it updates your code base, no need to interact with these compressed files or anything like that. It just works. And that's really the best thing about this module. It just works. It works the way you expect it to. So that's one that I include with every site that I'm using configuration management for. Another one here is configuration read-only mode. With this module, it actually allows you to lock down a particular environment, like the live environment, and you can set it into read-only mode. It will actually prevent any configuration from being saved to the database for this environment, which is good if that's a scenario you can be in. So you're able to go in, say like no modules can be enabled or disabled, no views can be changed, all that stuff. This is a module that you can use to help with that. Now, another great module is config ignore. This is great for those situations where like maybe I have a certain set of modules that are on my computer, I need for development, or that I have active in the development environment for building the site, like, Devel comes to mind. Also, maybe like the Views UI module. Those are ones that we don't need to have active on live at all. So, what happens if we export our configuration in dev without thinking too much about it and then go over and import that into live? Well, we just activated those modules on live. Well, config ignore will let you say, always ignore this particular configuration, never change it, whether it gets imported or whatever, so that it just stays right there. All right, and then the last one here I'm going to talk about real quick is just config split. Config split allows you to set up different scenarios to say, in this situation, use this configuration, or that one, use a different configuration. And, it's really helpful, again, if you want a different set of configuration for your local environment. There is some extra modules that kind of extend this even further, that can stretch the boundaries a little bit and let you use configuration on more than one site at a time. Honestly, it's a little bit confusing to me. I haven't gotten too deep into config split, but if you're interested, that's a place you can go and check it out. So again, I feel like Kristen, maybe she's like taking a look at our slides or something, because she's already kind of seeding the very next thing we're going to talk about, which is Drush. You can use Drush commands, the command line interface, to say Drush config export to export your configuration, Drush config import to import your configuration. And thankfully, these commands already do what that config direct save does. So it's not downloading some compressed file. It just saves it to the code base where it's supposed to go, and it just works. And yes, like what they were saying in the little chat window there, Drush commands have shortened versions that are easier to remember for some people. And so Drush config export, the short version is CEX. Drush config import is just CIM. So Drush CIM would do an import. Drush CEX would be the export. Cool. So the cool thing about this piece right here is being able to do it from your command line is just much easier than having to log into a site, go to the configuration section, click the import the import button once your information is ready in the test environment. It's just much easier to run a simple command and be done with it. Now, the automation piece really comes in where you start setting up tools to run these commands automatically. So for example, on Pantheon, we have a tool named Quicksilver that lets you tap into different workflows that are just running on Pantheon. So every time that you commit your code, every time that you clear your cache, every time that you deploy to test or to live. And so what you can do is just write a very simple little command that just literally says, Drush config import, tell it to run on every deployment to test and every deployment to live. And then that's a step you never have to think about again. All that you have to do and all that your team has to do is export your configuration in dev or local or whatever, and then the import piece is just assumed. It just always happens, which again, one less thing you have to think about is always good because it's much easier than having to sort of drudge through it and do it manually. You could also automate this with other things. You could set up a Circle CI or some other continuous integration step, or even tie it to some sort of a cron job if you wanted to import or export on certain intervals. But it's sort of up to you at that point. Because this is not a Pantheon specific thing, you could kind of go with any solution that you'd like. But all right, hey, let's go ahead and jump into the live demo now. I'm very excited for this because for the live demo, I'm very pleased to have a guest with me here today. We actually have Mr. Jenkins joining us today. He is the editor-in-chief at Umami Magazine. So one moment, I'll go and get him. Hello, everyone. My name is Mr. Jenkins, as David said, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Umami Magazine. Now, I agreed to give this talk because I thought it was important for the sake of transparency in these times to help people feel empowered to create their own content. So we're going to look behind the scenes, how we create content on the Umami Magazine website. All right, so here is the live version of our website, and we are logged in as the editor because I'm the editor. So let's go ahead and go and create this new piece of content. We're going to go up to the content page at the top. Now, I don't know about you, but I love oatmeal. Oatmeal is probably my favorite grain. If you didn't know, it's actually gluten-free, which is great for people that are gluten intolerant. But let's go ahead and create a new article that we've been working on all about eating more oatmeal. So I'm going to go to the article section, create some new article content. And I have some prepared references for this. I have the title here. It's I'm going to put in title, eat more oatmeal. Right, and then if I grab the content, I'm going to plug this in the body field right here. There we go. We got the oatmeal article all written. Now this has been proofed, of course, and now since I'm the editor, I can just publish it when I'm ready. But it's a good idea to add in an image. We like to use great imagery, showcasing delicious food. So let's add in a new image. Fortunately, thanks to Drupal's great media library, we have an extensive list of images here. And I have my oatmeal picture ready to go. Insert selected. Okay. That is ready. So now I just need to publish it. I'm going to save it to published and click save. Oh, if you can't see my screen, if it's a little difficult, don't forget you can double click in the window to kind of make that window a little bit bigger. All right. So here we go. We have eat more oatmeal. We have this great article encouraging people to eat more oatmeal. And we have other featured articles on the sidebar. So that's perfect. Now, if I just go over to the articles page, I can see all of the various articles that we have. Well, we would typically see all of the articles that we have, but let me do a refresh. Looks like we're only seeing one article for some reason. Well, that's a problem. I guess I'm going to give my developer a quick little phone call and kind of see if he can jump on real quick and help us figure this out. Just one moment. Yeah, hello, Kevin. Yeah, can you jump in and help with this? We're having some problems on the article page. All right, I'll see you later. Howdy, everybody. My name is Kevin, and I am the developer of Umami Magazine. Now, my boss, Mr. Jenkins, called, and he said there's some sort of problem on the articles page. And I have the live website open up right here, and yeah, I can see it is not working the way it's supposed to work, right? Well, I think a good place to start is probably opening it up in my local, my development environment, because that is where we are going to get some of the good stuff happening. So let me switch over to my Pantheon dashboard. I want to make sure that I can see all of that new content that's getting created there. So let me just go into database and files. We're going to sync up with live so that we get all of that great, delicious oatmeal content pulled in. Now, if I kind of jump the gun, I can see here there's workflows running, we're cloning the database and all that stuff. So it'll be ready to go in just a second. Once it's ready though, what I'm going to do is actually log into my development environment. We're going to take a look and we're going to see if we can fix what the problem is. I suspect it's probably a view issue. We're having some view issues a while back, and I was doing some debugging and I found the problem, but maybe I didn't find the problem after all. So let's jump in and take a look. We have visit development site right here. I can tell it's the development environment because it starts with dev dash. Now, if I visit the articles page, yeah, sure enough, there is the eat more oatmeal article that Mr. Jenkins just created up on live. So let me log in as my developer account and see if I can figure this out. All right, so here I am logged in as the developer. Now, if I want to figure out, this issue, if I need to determine what the problem is, I like to start with making sure we actually have the content on the site that we're expecting. So let's just run over to the content tab, and that will tell us if we have other article content. I hope it didn't get deleted or something, but yeah, here we go. So we can see we have lots of article content, so we should be seeing more than one on that page. Now let's jump back to the site, and it's probably best just to jump right in and take a look at the view. See if we can figure out what is wrong with this view and why it is not behaving the way we'd expect it to. So let's click on the little tab here. Let's click on Edit View, and we'll see if we can figure out what is wrong with this view. I see the problem already. So we have right here, display a specified number of items, and we have one item. All right, obviously that is going to be a problem. So if we just change this, change it to paged output full pager, click apply. And I'm pretty sure we had 6 items per page before. So let me put that in there. We'll click apply and we'll see if this fixes the problem. Let's click save. All righty, there we go. So now we have 6 items. We have the pager. I'm pretty sure this fixes the problem. So let's go ahead and export the configuration in this environment. You know, this is an easy enough problem. I probably could just do this in the other environments, but that's not the way our workflow works. I might look like a cowboy. I'm no cowboy coder. I'm not making changes directly to live. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export configuration in dev, and then I'll be able to move that up to test, get a fresh test environment all spun up and ready for me to test with, and then I'll be good to go. So let's go over to configuration at the top. We'll go down to configuration synchronization. All right, there we go. It says that there are some changes, and you might be tempted at first to click the import all, but unfortunately that would lose all of our changes. We don't want to import the configuration from code because our code is outdated, right? We haven't done an export yet. So if you go to export, what you're going to see is an interface to click the export button. But remember, like David said earlier, now if you click this, it is going to export a compressed file, which is useless. So what I want to do, we have this great config direct save module enabled, which lets us go to this update tab. We just select sync and we click on update configuration. Now it says configuration has been updated. So if I go back to my site, looks like everything is working okay. Now back over in my Pantheon interface, because I'm in SFTP mode, I'm allowed to make changes to code directly in the development environment. I still get to use commits to save all my work and all that stuff, but I can actually see right here, if I click on this, I can see that one file has changed, and it's the views view featured articles. That looks right to me, but if I click on it, I actually get a diff. I can see what was changed in configuration that got exported to code. So I could see it changed from, show some 1 to full pager with 6. So I think this looks good. Now, if I close this, I'm just going to put in a quick commit message. We'll say changing the articles page to 6. And I'm going to click on commit. So again, even though I'm in SFTP mode, the great thing here about Pantheon is we can still use commit. Even though I don't know much about Git myself, I can just use the interface and it's all right there, super user friendly, and I still get version control. So I'm able to use version control for all of my configuration, but also all of my code, of course. Now, while we're waiting for this, if we jump over to the test environment, we'll see we have a commit ready to deploy. So in order to sync up my test environment, I just put in a deploy log message, make sure I have the correct checkboxes checked, and click on the button to deploy. So now my expectations, what this is doing is it is actually removing the test environment and creating a brand new test environment with all of my fresh database files from live and all of my code from dev. So it's all kind of coming together in one place so that when I view my test environment, I am not taking any risks with my live environment. It's all just going through and working directly from test. So what I'll be able to do is go into my test environment. I'll be able to import the configuration, and then we'll be able to see it all happening right there. All right, we do just have to wait for this to complete. We can see up here again, the workflows tab is spinning. So we know it is working. All right, very good. So if we click on visit test site, we can see we're on the test site by the URL. Oops, let me do a quick refresh. It might have still been finishing up something there. There we go. All right, and so you can go to the articles tab. Well, yeah, we see only one, but we do get that new content in there. Now, if I click on login again, I am going to log in as a developer. Put in my password. And now all that I have to do here, rather than having to just make that change to views directly, all I have to do is go into configuration and make the change from the configuration synchronization screen. So under configuration synchronization, I have this new views view featured articles, and I can actually view the different from here as well. So I could get a diff and see exactly what's changed if I wasn't sure, but I've already done that over on Pantheon, but still this interface is pretty neat. You can see exactly, right next to each other, exactly what's changed. So if we're ready, the active here is what's in the database right now, and staged is what we're about to import. We want to change it to a paged full pager with 6. That looks good. So if we click on import all, we should see after just a moment, it will say that we are all done. Very good. Now, if we jump back to our site, we can go up to articles and fingers crossed. There we go. Awesome. So now I'm going to jump on my phone real quick and just send a quick text message to Mr. Jenkins and tell him to check out the test environment. Once he gives the thumbs up and says that it looks right, then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and deploy this to live and we'll be on our way. So let's see. Oh, yep, I just got the go ahead. He looks like he's happy with this. So let's jump over to our live environment. So over in Pantheon, we go back to our live tab. We'll put in our deploy log message and click on deploy. Now this time, instead of having to go into the live site and show you exactly how it works, importing, we've already seen that. I'm going to show you how to use Drush, because Drush is a super helpful command line tool for interacting directly with your Drupal site. Now, I am using Terminus. Terminus is a Pantheon command line interface that is going to, well, if you're familiar with Drush, there's Drush aliases and all of the alias files and things like that. At Pantheon, there's a tool, the Terminus, that will let me run Drush directly on the environment that we're interacting with. So it's going to look slightly different, but I'll show you exactly what we're looking at there. All right, so now we can see it is completed. If I jump back to the live version of our website and do a refresh, we do not see any changes. It's still just the way it was before. But now if I jump over to my command line interface and I just do a Terminus Drush, and then the name of my site, so it's going to be Umami CFM, and it's going to be on the live environment, so I put .live, and then --, and then we're going to do a import. So it's going to do config import. So to break this down a little bit, the Terminus part right here and the site.the environment part is all Terminus. That's Pantheon. If you're just doing a Drush command directly, all that you need is the Drush config import. You don't need that other stuff. I'm going to click on enter. Once this finishes, it's actually going to prompt me and make sure that I want to do this. And this is an important thing. Now, don't forget to talk to your team, making sure that this is a process that they're familiar with. So we will, it'll prompt me right there. It'll say, am I sure that I want to import that particular file? We'll say yes. Synchronize configuration completed. Very good. So let's jump back to our site and do a quick little refresh. And there we go. We got it, and we are done. So very good. Excellent. Well, I think I'm going to hand the mic now back to David. I don't think we need to go through anything else there. So thank you all very much. My name's Kevin. It's been a wonderful time talking to you, and I'll go get David. I'll be right back. All right, everyone. Well, thanks again for checking out the live demo. I hope that you enjoyed introducing, kind of getting to know Mr. Jenkins and Kevin a little bit. That is the process that you go through to do a modern development workflow using configuration management. Now, there are a few more things that I'd like to talk about before we wrap up for today. We are at time. How do you figure out how to, who broke the page and all that stuff? Well, let's jump over real quick. If we show the page right here, I'm logged in with my site. I can just jump over to sites, files, sites default, and config. And now if I just do a git log -p and then the name of the particular file that changed, we can actually see right here, I broke the site. And big surprise, right? Like I kind of constructed that. So I broke the site. I did it yesterday at this time, so it hasn't been broken for very long, fortunately. But that's it. So let me flip back to my slides and just say a big thank you to everyone who kind of helped me prepare for this session. There are more resources, and I don't have time to talk about them, but you can go to my website, check out the slides there. You can click all those links and get all the help that you need from there. So thank you all very much. If you have any other questions, feel free to send them to me directly. I'm on Slack. You can DM me, or you can just reach out in one of the public channels. I'd be happy to talk more about this. You can also tweet at me at David Needham. Thank you all very much, and I hope to see you all around the community.